This is an oral interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of the interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
Hi, good morning. I'm Alan Chase, and I'm from Orleans and am now living in Orleans.
How old are you?
I'm 48.
Do you have any relatives who were in the military?
No. No relatives that were in the military. I was pretty much the first.
All right. When you were young, were you ever interested in joining the military?
Nope. Didn't occur to me to join the military until here in high school. In fact, this high school.
What really interested you or motivated you to join the military?
I got in trouble for saying this in college. I had the exact same question in my college newspaper at Villanova University in Philadelphia. And to be completely honest, what interested me was 2 years before me, another student here at Nauset got a scholarship to the Navy ROTC program, 4-year scholarship. I thought, well, that's pretty good. I didn't know anything about the military. And I remember him. I remember being at the award ceremony over at the gymnasium. And I thought, well, I better look into that because it's a pretty good deal. So I looked into it, and I ended up getting it as well 2 years later. So that's what brought me to the Navy, and I was in NROTC, which is Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps, and that was at our university. And from there, you learn kind of the basics of what it would be like to be an officer, and then you're commissioned and you go into service. So that was what brought me to it. What got me in trouble was when I said that at Villanova, it sounded more like I was going to the military for money, and they didn't like that. So they said, hey, you can't, don't say that. And I said, well, it was kind of true, I mean, that's what caught my attention. And then after that, things changed. But that was what originally got me thinking about the military.
What branch were you in?
I was in the Navy.
How old were you when you joined the military?
I guess technically 18, because when you graduate from high school, and you enroll in a university and you're in the ROTC program, you're the Reserve Officer Training Corps, so you're technically a reserve officer. So that would be when I really entered the military. But my commissioning date, which is when everything else is figured on, was May 1992. That was when you graduate from your university, you have your degree, you've satisfied all the requirements for the Navy, they commission you as an officer, so that date was always May 8th, 1992.
What was the highest rank you achieved in the Navy?
It was a commander, and for those of the folks that are starting to learn about the military, the rank structure is the same across all the military. It's very close to the same, Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines. The one difference is the Navy has different terminology. So the rank of officer 5th grade is a commander, and that equals a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, the Marines, and the Army.
How long were you in the military?
From the time I was commissioned to the time I was retired was 24 years. If you were to count the ROTC time, it would be an extra 4 years, but generally we don't because that was our training time and we were college students.
When and where were you deployed?
Deploy is an interesting term that probably gets confused a lot. Sometimes people mean, did you leave your primary house? Did you leave the United States? Or did you go do, in the military, deployment means you leave a certain area that you're attached to and you work somewhere else for an extended period of time. I spent most of my time overseas, about 19 years outside of the United States. And then, so I had my home in a different country most of the time. And then from there, we would also deploy. And we would go out for anywhere from 3 days to a year. I think the longest I deployed was actually 6 months, I think. I'm trying to think back. Yeah, 6-month deployment. And that was on a ship in the Persian Gulf, pretty much the Indian Ocean, the Persian Gulf. So to answer your question, because I was based 19 to 24 years overseas, and then I deployed from there, I went largely all across Asia Pacific, most of Europe, some of Africa, never South America for a job. I've traveled there, but not for the Navy. And then throughout the North American region, Canada, U.S., never Mexico, but pretty much worldwide.
What was your favorite experience that you had in the military?
That's interesting because it's like one experience, which is tough because it's a way of life for so long. Some interesting stories that I always remember. Usually they're not so stunning. They're just, you realize, oh, it's how things work. I was on the 9th floor of the American Embassy in Tokyo working with my group, and the ambassador was there, and the Secretary of Defense from the United States was in town, and he was having a meeting with the ambassador. And my boss, he was very tense guy. He wanted to make sure that when the meeting was over between the ambassador and the Secretary of Defense could get right on the elevator. So he told me, go out in the hallway, put your hand in the elevator door so it's open for when the Secretary of Defense comes through. And I was, at the time, a lieutenant commander, so I was an 04, which is equal to major in the Army and the Marines and the Air Force. So I'd been in for maybe 13 years, working hard, and my job was now to put my arm in the door and make sure the elevator was there. And I said to my boss, it's going to make a loud noise, you know how the elevators make that bzzz. And he said, yeah, it's okay, it's important, go out there and do it. So I went out there, put my arm in the door, and then sure enough, the Secretary of Defense came through and said, thank you very much. Got on the elevator and went down. So those are silly things that you remember. Probably one of the most exciting was waking up at this was about 1 a.m. with a phone call. Part of what I did was a lot of intelligence and reconnaissance work. And at the time, there was a location in Asia Pacific called East Timor, and it was having a lot of difficulties with a coup and rioting, basically political instability. And we were to go out and gather information, I guess. So 1 o'clock in the morning, you get a phone call, you're taking off in 3 hours, pack your bags, get your team together, and go. And I said, well, can you tell us where? I said, no, it's an open phone line, we can't tell you. I said, well, how am I gonna pack? Is it warm weather or cold weather? They said, it's warm weather. I said, okay. So we got to the command unit on the airstrip that we have. I got my team together. We're all there within less than 3 hours, and get all our gear together, ready to go, and took off on time. Flew. I can talk about this now. Flew down to Australia, where we staged to get information before we went out to do our work, and we were in Australia for a few days while we waited for the political system in the United States to settle out. Basically, then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was working with her alliances, trying to figure out what the United States' response to this would be. And once they had a response, we would go in and work it. So that was kind of fun and interesting to see how it all plays out. Another time that was quite interesting was that same group that I was working with there, later when I was at the embassy in Tokyo, they were hit by a Chinese aircraft down in the South China Sea, and they had to crash land on a Chinese island. And that was a big problem because they were down there working primarily to collect information in the area. So it was a diplomatically sensitive moment. It was all my old crew. So at the embassy in Tokyo, I was busy helping other people understand what was most likely going on the ground in China, because we didn't know. So that was an exciting time, because not only was it dangerous from the perspective of international relations between two large nations, China and the US, but there was human lives in China who were at risk, and I knew them because I had flown with them for a while. So those were both some memorable times. There's plenty, but those are some good ones. If we run out of time, we'll keep talking about those.
What was your least favorite experience in the military?
Least favorite?
Mm-hmm.
Least favorite. I think if you want to think very big picture, esoteric kind of problem is the military has to execute the national security policy of the United States, regardless of whether you agree with that policy or not. So, and that's what we swear to uphold and defend, the United States Constitution. So it doesn't matter who's the president, it doesn't matter who the administration is, it doesn't matter what their policies are. By the time it comes from the National Command Authority, the president, etc., down to the Departments of Defense and into your little area, you've got to carry out the duties. So if it doesn't make sense, that's too bad. So I would say in that regard, it's sometimes frustrating. We were, the ramp up to Gulf War II, when the second George Bush, President Bush 43, looked like he was moving the U.S. administration to war, a lot of those in the military didn't necessarily see the same logic happening, but we had to prepare and get ready. So I would think balancing that understanding of the greater picture and watching how the politics play out is sometimes not fun. On a more simple response, I think the unknown is always difficult for me. I don't mind deployments. Deployments are fine if you know you're going to go and you know you're going to come back. That never happens. You have to leave when it'll change. So we're going to leave next week, but you don't because there's problems with equipment or maybe there's a political situation. So you're kind of in limbo. That limbo is always difficult because you've got your families. You want to take care of your families. You want to say goodbye properly. You don't want to keep coming in and out, confusing everybody. So that was never a lot of fun, not knowing. And then once you do deploy or you do leave, you don't know when you're really coming back, even though it might be said, we'll be back in 3 months. It changes. So that part was always hard to work with.
What did you do for entertainment in the military?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Let me back up a little bit because some things that a lot of people forget is that even though here in the American media we'll see someone get a medal for some type of bravery or combat valor, the majority of people are working very long hours in very tough conditions, and they're often really boring. So what do you do to keep fun and have fun, especially at sea? I mean, at sea we work basically 20-hour days, maybe just depends on where you are, but about 20 hours. And it can get monotonous. A lot of folks exercise. A lot of folks watch movies. In fact, most military can recite the lines to a lot of different movies, and you'll know the generations of the officers or the enlisted that go through because they'll be quoting different movies because they watch them all the time. So you just watch them over and over again, and then the dialogue will pepper the language at the meeting. So you're basically doing allusions to different movies while you're keeping yourself entertained at a meeting. But then there's programmed activities that are kind of fun just to break it up. We used to always have Steel Beach Picnic. Steel Beach Picnic would be at some point during your time at sea, good weather, usually in a warm area. Your ship would have a large flat area up top. We had an enormous one because we had fighter aircraft and helicopters on our ship. So they clear it all off, so it's a big flat space, kind of like a football field. And you bring up barbecues and you bring up games and obstacle courses and challenges and things like that. And you just spend the whole day on the top of the ship having fun, playing games, challenging one another, doing things like that. That was always a way to pass the time. Sometimes ships will do swim qualifications, and that's basically usually the smaller ships. You couldn't do it on our ship because it was so large you couldn't jump into the water. But if you have smaller ships, a lot of times they will do swim runs. So same thing. You'll go outside and you get to jump in the warm Caribbean Ocean or something and have a good time. Keeps it. The other thing is food. A lot of times the food is really good because it's all people have to look forward to. They're like, all right, great, have some good steak and lobster, some good food every once in a while. Good question.
Did you make any close friends when you served?
That's an interesting question too. I think relationships are very different because you're always moving. We move generally every 2 to 3 years, and that is everybody. So every month, someone is coming, someone's leaving, someone is coming, someone's leaving. we have what we call Hail and Farewells. Hail and Farewells are a monthly party where the command gets together and welcomes the new people and says goodbye to the folks that are leaving. So you become very well acquainted with people because you're under high stress situations for an extended period of time, both in one day and over a period of 7 months. And you become very close with them, but you know that they're going to leave. Maybe you'll see them again, maybe you won't. You cross paths often in the military, especially in my field. It's a very small group of people, so you didn't see them a lot. But I don't stay in touch with many of them because you get busy. Try to stay in touch with the few that I had early on. They're still some of my best friends. But I think it's a different mindset. You quickly get to become good, close friends, but you always know that you're going to separate again.
How did your family react when you decided to join the military?
I think my mother and father were interested. I mean, they weren't negative. They weren't ultra positive. They were pleased when I got the scholarship because college is expensive. It's only gotten more expensive. But they were positive towards it. I think they found it interesting. Growing up here, we had a large maritime history. My great-grandfather, two of my great-grandfathers were the Humane Society, which was the precursor to the Coast Guard stations, which is the life-saving stations that we have just down the road. There was one at Nauset Light, and there was one over in Orleans, and they were the keepers of both. So long history of maritime, even going back into the whaling days, but never military. So I think if anything, they were just curious because we didn't know a lot about the military.
What time did you wake up and what time did you go to bed?
And that varies. I've worked on aircraft, ships, shore sites. I haven't done any full-time submarines. And it just depends. Most shore sites in my field were 12-hour shifts, a watch. So to get up, you have to be the watch an hour early to do turnover so you understand what's happening. Then you do your 12-hour shift. Then you do turnover with the evening crew or the day crew, however it may be. And then you probably have to do some normal work and get home. So watch days were probably 18-hour days. And those were, you'd probably get up at 5 a.m. and you'd be there at 6, do watch turnover at 7, go all the way to 7, do turnover, and then you might finish up some reports and get home around 9. If you're on a ship is totally different because it's 24 hours a day all the time with a set group of people. So you're, oftentimes many of the folks that run the ships will do 4 hours of work, maybe they'll do an hour of sleep, they'll do an hour of non-watch work, and they'll go back to the watch, and they'll be standing their duty for 4 hours, and so on and so forth. So that's tough on the body. That's it's very tough on the body. That's it's almost like sleep deprivation because you don't get straight 8 hours sleep in a row. Aircraft, it's mandated that you have 8 hours of sleep so that you're rested, so when you're flying you don't cause major problems. But that's still tough because your flight schedule will always change. So sometimes it'll be 1 in the morning, sometimes it'll be 3 in the morning, sometimes it'll be 4 in the afternoon. You had to get pretty good at falling asleep fast and getting your rest because it always varied. I think that was probably, going back to one of those earlier questions, that's a tough thing. It's like always being jet lagged. You kind of have to get used to how to get your body to sleep fast and wake up fast.
What was your scariest moment in the military?
I never felt too scared in the Navy. We didn't have what a lot of the Army folks had, which was going door to door in urban environments in a war situation. I was in the air 1999 Desert Fox, and you could look down and see anti-aircraft artillery going through the sky, but we knew it was so low it wasn't going to impact us. Had a lot of aircraft maintenance issues, which would probably unnerve you, but you get used to it. Oil leaks and engines quitting and things like that. Never actually had to put on a parachute, but we always practiced. So in case we did, and that's what happened to my crew when I was talking about it in the other story. they were flying in South China Sea, a jet hit them, and then they dropped. They had to run their parachutes, get ready to jump out. Then the pilot got it under control. Then they didn't know what to do. Should they land in China or should they land in the ocean? And they call that a ditch if you land in the ocean. So they were getting ready to ditch, doing those emergency procedures, got it completely under control and thought it would be best if they landed. They're alive today, so that might have been a very smart choice. But when you're in the air and all those things are happening, you're so used to it because you're trying to keep the plane working and everything. That it's not really scary. So luckily, I didn't have too many terrifying moments. I'm trying to think back. No, I didn't have any terrifying moments. And I think even when you do, because you practice your emergency procedures so much that you don't have an opportunity to feel scared. That's the whole point. When we practice our emergency procedures constantly. So even if you go into a state of shock, you get your emergency procedures done as best you can. And you either come out of it fine or the opposite, which would be pretty bad. Luckily, I can't point at any terrifying moments.
What did you do on holidays?
Most holidays you were working. And as the officer in charge, the division officer in charge of my crew, generally it was up to me to make sure that we were doing something enjoyable still. We've had some Christmases on the aircraft. I've had some Christmases at sea. One of the things that I'm known for now is decorating. My office is always decorated because I collected all these decorations. And if you don't decorate, the days will just go by and you won't even notice what season it is because generally your spaces don't have windows or there's no land around, so it's not like it's snowing or not snowing. But we would always get together, we'd have a party, usually decorate the office space, that kind of thing. Christmas lights if you can for Christmas. But we would always try to celebrate because it connects people to what they're used to and it gives them a sense of stability that sometimes when it's missing can make people feel a little bit more anxious. So we did our best to recognize all the holidays and do something for the holidays, even if it was something simple like wearing silly hats or dressing up in green for St. Patrick's Day or something like that. It was important. It helped people remember what their family and friends were doing at home.
Are you or do you know anybody who's physically or mentally affected by joining the military?
Yeah, there's plenty of folks, mostly in the Army and Marines because they're in the last 10 or 16 years now. What is it, 2018? 17 years now. They were the folks that were on the ground that would most likely encounter enemy fire, whether it be an explosive device or an actual mortar round or bullets. So lots of folks have issues in that regard. Mostly, I mean, the physical ones are obvious. Mental ones, probably everybody is. It doesn't matter just because you're military. As you get older and you go through life, you have struggles. So the mental ones don't show up as much, but folks suffer stress. One of the things that I remember, we were pulling out to sea in Norfolk, Virginia, and we were all lined up on the ship. We call it manning the rail, and you're in your dress uniforms and you look good because you're going out to sea and all the family members wave. And one of the gentlemen in my division, shortly thereafter, found out that his son was abducted at the shopping mall. Like, someone tried to grab his son. Well, that's got to be terrifying. I mean, you're going to sea for 6 months and you just left your family and you get word that your son was abducted from a shopping mall. Turned out everything was fine. They did an Amber Alert and retrieved his son and prosecuted the culprit. But that's got to be, that would be a terrifying moment. Luckily, I never had one of those. But that's something that would be really hard to deal with. And I think that's something that could stay with you where you feel helpless because you can't do anything. We're sailing out to sea for 7 months or 6 months. His family's at home trying to deal with the situation.
How do you think your life would differ if you didn't go to the military?
Probably would have been in the United States State Department. I was a language guy at college, and I was on a Navy scholarship. So if I wasn't on a Navy scholarship, I probably would have looked for a reason to still follow that professional category. So I'd probably be in the State Department, probably still be in the State Department. Still doing all the same things, just from a different perspective. All part of the national security policy. There's the Department of State, Department of Defense, there's a lot of other departments, but the Department of State is more diplomatic in its discussions. The Department of Defense is more projection of power, as well as supporting and enforcing the policies of the government. But probably quite similar. Probably quite similar.
What made you, or how did you feel when you left the military?
I was excited. Because it was time to change. We were coming home here. I had done 24 years around the world, but I knew I wanted to get back to Massachusetts, Cape Cod, Orleans. I wanted my family to see their family that they had never been a part of, except for every 3 years my family would see each other. Generally, my parents would come visit us somewhere, and then every 3 years we'd come home here. So I was excited to start a different chapter of life. I work at Cape Cod Community College now. It's a lot of fun. It's great to help people and be involved in the community. It's a lot different because you're used to one thing for 24 years and now you're in something else. It's completely different. So I'm spending a lot of time learning how to operate in a new environment. But I was excited. I was glad. I was happy that I had done what I had done for so long, and I was looking forward to the change.
If somebody were to join the military, what would you recommend or tell them?
I would recommend or tell them to really embrace whatever aspect of the military they join. Meaning, if you're in the Navy, get out there and get on ships and work all the different missions that are out there to work. Really make that your primary function in life, because you're young, you've got the chance. Really master it. Same for the Army or the Air Force. If you're joining one of those, don't do it as a means to a different end. Meaning, don't think, well, I'm going to see the world, so I'll join the Army. Join the Army because you want to be out in the field, leading troops, working in tough conditions, those kind of things. If you want to see the world, you can do a lot of different things. Economics, you could be in the Department of State, you could be in agriculture, you could be in teaching, you could be anything. So keep track of why you're doing something. So if you want to be in the Air Force because you want to fly planes, go for it. But if you can't fly planes, keep your mind open to where you could fly planes, because it sounds like flying planes might be that person's desire. Not everybody flies planes in the Air Force, not everybody drives ships in the Navy, not everybody drives tanks in the Army, that kind of thing. So what are you doing that's enjoyable? Make sure that you like that aspect and you're just not in the Marines to do something else. You should be in the Marines because you love the challenge of getting into places that are difficult and bringing a division or a squad or platoon along with you.
Was there any time when you regret joining the military?
Like any profession, it has its ups and downs. My profession in the Navy was definitely more active and exciting when I was younger because you were doing, as an officer, you're doing more. The organization of the military is such that you have categories of personnel. You have technical experts, and then you move up into broad leaders. So generally at the lower ranks, both enlisted and officer, you're doing more. And then as you increase, both as an officer and enlisted, you are managing more. And it's definitely a lot more fun when you're doing. When you're managing, it can become sometimes problematic and routine and bureaucratic. So somewhere probably around the 13 or the 14-year mark, I wasn't particularly happy with where I was and what I was doing. Some of that was like what we talked about earlier with maybe not being personally aligned with some of the American policies. never questioning them. You had to do them. But maybe, you start thinking, well, maybe I'd be better off in a different position. Some of it was what I was actually doing in the military. Some of my job shifted into more of a computer realm, and I was more in people, language, culture, and international relations. So I was starting to do more and more computer world because that's what our field did. But that wasn't always interesting to me, so I started thinking about that. So I never regretted it, but like any profession, if you were a doctor, if you were an architect, there's going to be ups and downs. And by the time I finished, the 24 years, I was quite pleased to get because I kind of figured out where I should best be using my skills.
All right, that concludes our interview. Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome.